The kneeling of this guy, on this guy's neck brought so many scenarios to me. The symbol itself, I saw it as the people in power just suffocating those who are less fortunate. It has triggered a conversation that needs to be had across the cricketing fraternity.
You look at some comments that people have made in the past and you think, well, actually, I probably should have said something then, because that wasn't right.
The way that West Indians, for example, if I take myself, are described historically as powerful, as strong, and as athletic, and that is sort of contrasted against the way some other teams who look different are described.
When you think of education, you think of head, but if I think of spirit, I think of heart. How do we combine the two in finding a resolution in the way forward?
You need to educate more. I think now is the time that you really need to drive it home.
As we continue to move forward as a cricket family, we are a genuine family that sees nothing but the game and the purity of our game.
Welcome to another edition of Interviews Inside Out, and we thank you very much for being with us. And I'm sure that everyone is very aware of what has been going on globally with the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected so many economies and countries. But also in the last couple of weeks, out of that, an experience has arisen where there has been dissatisfaction among people of color, which has led to protests, a little bit of civil unrest. And today we want to discuss equality and what is happening, where cricket is, and what cricket can do going forward. And we've been joined today by some very esteemed guests in the former West Indies skipper, Daren Sammy. We've got Tom Moody, World Cup winner a couple of times over with Australia, coach of Sri Lanka, and a number of other franchises around the world. Bazid Khan from Pakistan. Bazid, thank you very much. Isha Guha, who has become a very prominent broadcaster after her playing days have been established. And of course, JP Duminy from all the way down in South Africa. So a lot of time zones to contend with. I think, Tom, you're worse off than anyone else. It's almost midnight where you are, past your bedtime.
Yeah, not quite, Bish, and good evening, good morning, whatever it may be to everyone else. But an absolute pleasure to be part of this panel and this discussion.
Daren, I want to start with you because you've had some experiences which you've brought to light in the last couple of weeks. Just give us some insight about how that experience has been.
I would rather not say it's unfortunate, but it was a needed discussion. And like Tom, I would like to thank you for having me on this panel. With all what has happened in the world with the death of George Floyd, it has, triggered a revolution, a movement for equality, for people of color. And in all of that, one of the videos I was watching, brought to my realization that a certain word that was being called to me was something that could be deemed degrading because of the color of my skin. Now, I say that when I reflect 6 or 7 years ago, when it was being done, I would say that I did not feel in any way that it was being degrading to me, because firstly, my understanding of the word was relating to me being strong, a strong stallion. And it was myself and another gentleman of this similar color, complexion as myself. So when I found out about that, I decided to seek confirmation, seek conversation, seek dialogue as to, really when it was being used, was it truly from a place of love and not being degrading to the color of my skin. And having started that conversation, obviously it opened, the door for moments like we are having now. And what I'm gonna say about that is, if there is any word that could be deemed degrading, or even to the point of people accusing you of being a racist, it is not to be used. And I think from that, it's time to start the education process, the educating of people that, certain things, even though it's cultural and you might think you mean no harm, it won't be the case to everybody, especially if they understand the background of that word that they've been called. So I decided to talk about it, and I've had a few discussions with the persons that were being that were using those words, and they've explained to me that it didn't mean any form of malice or trying to degrade me because of the color of my skin. But I also pointed that if it could mean in any way, shape, or form that, you shouldn't have used it. And it makes me reflect that, in that dressing room, it was only two of us that really were that complexion for them to use that word. So that's been a learning experience for me, and I'm happy that we are having this discussion where we could air out and come up with measures to eradicate that from the cricket game.
Isha, having gone through a system and with your own background and gender as well, what has your experience been along the lines of what Daren has spoken about and otherwise?
My experiences of growing up in the UK, obviously as a person of colour, I have been reflecting quite a lot in the last couple of weeks just on, I think you look back at times where people have perhaps been racist towards you, and many times I perhaps just blocked it out. I tried to ignore it, and to the point where I've actually forgotten those comments from the past. And you're doing it because you want to fit in, and you want to fit into society. I'm in a fortunate position that my parents were very supportive in what I was doing. I started playing boys cricket. I was the only British Indian in a team full of British white boys and British Pakistani boys, and the fact that my parents never saw it as an issue when some traditional families might have done kind of helped the situation, and so no one else saw it as an issue. So I was very grateful for that in my early days, and then when you're growing up in that environment, perhaps sometimes you do overcompensate to try and fit in. It's the same, I guess, scenario as I've experienced as being the minority from a female point of view. So you look at some comments that people have made in the past and you think, well, actually, I probably should have said something then, because that wasn't right. And so it's really made me kind of feel guilty in a way, because on the one hand you feel like you've enabled this problem to perpetuate because you haven't said anything. But then I look at it on the other side and I think, well, would I have got to where I'd got to if I had confronted every single time? So it's and what that represents, a young girl might look at someone like myself or Ebony or Mel or Alison on screen and think, well, that's something I can do now. So it's a constant battle in my head, but I think Daren is right in the fact that we need to just open up conversation. And while, I'm a big believer in humanity and I don't like to look at someone and judge, unfortunately that is the case for a number of people. They look at a person and they see colour, or they don't see colour. They see white privilege, or they see colonialism, or that there's so many different things that people see as a first port of call. So then what is the next best thing? The next best thing is education, but the willingness to learn. You can't just tell people how it was. People have got to be inquisitive and really want to find out why a person's perspective is that certain way. So that will help you understand and help you formulate an opinion, but also be able to work with others. In franchise cricket, you're working with people from so many different backgrounds, and that's where I think cricket, we have a real opportunity with cricket, because it does cross lots of different races and backgrounds and religions, and it's a sport that really unites. It brings people together. I mean, you look at the current England team. We've stumbled across this team that is diverse, but the more important word to me is representation. It represents the UK, and people from Muslim communities, from black communities, can look at these guys and say, well, they've managed to do it, so can I. But the other thing that I'm really proud of with this team is their intention to really learn about each other's cultures. And that undoubtedly has led to their success. It was similar for us in 2009, myself and Ebony Rain for Brent in the England team. But yeah, it's what it represents to the greater audience.
Bazid, just picking off of what Daren said there, obviously a resident of the subcontinent, what are your views?
I think we've been ingrained with this. It is wrong, but it is colorism. I would use that word, which I think still is racism. You'll have two brothers, but one of them is darker than the other. He'll always be the butt of the jokes, and it has been this way since our independence, or since colonialism. That has been a big issue. The point I want to add here as well, just for Pakistan, is that the players that come through the ranks nowadays are from very humble backgrounds, and education is a problem. So they've been subjected to this kind of this kind of stuff all their lives, and it's almost as if it's ingrained in them, or it's almost that it's not wrong. Maybe they think, yes, it's not malicious, the intention is not there, but it still is wrong, and now it's coming to a light. I think my suggestion would be that our cricket boards or our first class teams do give you a lot of advice on staying away from corruption, and you get a lot of videos and all that about them being educated on this front. I think this is also an issue, especially in Asia, especially in Pakistan, where the education levels aren't as high. They need to be going through this process of being told of what is right and what is wrong, because you'll be surprised that so many cricketers or so many people who are coming up will not realize that actually not right.
Tom, what are your thoughts on this issue, having played successfully and coached successfully as well? From a teaching perspective, what is your understanding?
Well, I think leaders in our communities, in our cricket communities, and in the case of whether it be a captain or senior player or a coach or an administrator, we have an enormous responsibility as an educator along many different platforms. And one of those platforms which I think has been neglected and not given the attention that is required, and that is the understanding of the different levels of racism that's potentially within the game. So if anything, if any positive can come out of what we're experiencing now, and that is it's highlighting to the game, it's highlighting to all of us that are stakeholders in the game that we need to be a lot more understanding of how we can make this better, and what it is we can make, what we can do as individuals to make this a better situation. I certainly, from my own personal point of view, have always taken a journey into different environments for really the opposite reason to what we're talking about, because I've always enjoyed the challenge of working in different cultures. I've always been fascinated by different environments and different people, and trying to learn from them, against being the complete opposite, to resist the challenge of those different environments. And I think what we've seen historically in the game, when teams or individuals have moved to different playing areas, they've been very hesitant to embrace the different countries that they've gone to. It has changed dramatically over recent years, and I think the various franchise cricket that we have around the world has helped build and bridge that gap. But I still think we've got a long way to go. And Daren's point around the use of a word being, I suppose, used incorrectly, I think that's just that's a really good example of a team environment thinking that it's okay, and wrapping their arms around with, I would call, banter and love, but not really looking at the depth of the situation or the word that is being used and how that may impact that person that they're talking to.
And just to remind our viewers, obviously, we're having this discussion under the experience of what is happening in America, in the UK, as Daren pointed out, understanding people's culture, taking the time to understand differences. I know a lot of good people out there who don't look like many of us. If you want to use the term white people, that I'm sure we can all draw on experiences of people who have been good, empathetic, good at heart. JP, from a South African perspective, how do you see the game from an equality perspective, and what has historically been happening in your homeland and where it's gotten to?
Yeah, thanks, Bish. I think when I look at South African cricket, I think the well-known term that has been thrown around a lot in cricketing context is transformation. Now, if we go back quite a few years, when South Africa came back into international cricket, I think the word then was almost target, and the word has evolved to almost sound a bit better. But I think where we've possibly come up short with this understanding of transformation is that from a government point of view, we've looked at it from an external and how can we change the external. So when we think of transformation, if I had to ask anybody in South Africa, they would think, well, it is possibly a person of color coming in place of a white person. The reality for me, and this has probably been only in the last few years of my career, in truly understanding the responsibility and the impact you can make as a South African cricket, is that transformation is, in its purest form, is actually from the heart. So it needs to be an internal thing that transforms, that then transcends into an external being. So we can't transform outward inward. It needs to be an inward outward transformation. And I think once we truly understand that, and we really accept, the background of our country, the struggles that we've had, and various people that have fought for the freedoms of our country, we can truly appreciate what transformation is. And I think when it comes to, as everybody has alluded to here, when it comes to the opportunity presented in a cricketing context, I think it's immense. Because it's, if anything, what the last few weeks has taught us is that there's still a lot of animosity, there's still a lot of hurt, there's a lot of baggage that still flows. And I can only speak from a South African context now, from a cricketing perspective, right? In conversations that I've had with various people that have played the game, current, past players, it's interesting how the current climate has allowed and brought about certain experiences that people have had, and Daren made mention of a few, as well as Isha. It has really revived certain experiences that people have had, and the reality is we haven't dealt with it properly. We haven't healed from it. But it starts, as we've all agreed here, it starts with conversation and authentic conversation. And I think that's what we're aiming to do here. And hopefully this is a platform that will evolve, where we get to speak a little bit more and dive a little bit deeper into these issues that haven't really been dealt with properly.
So I'll throw this out for anyone in the panel. Is cricket okay? Where is cricket? Where is broadcasting? Because many of us here, all of us have done some form of broadcasting. Where are we? Anyone?
Still not okay. It might get there. I can talk about a Pakistan perspective, because Pakistan, you get to stardom in cricket more than anything else whatsoever. So that's one avenue which people do look at. And the one issue that I do have is that if you get some, for example, you get a player like Muhammad Yusuf. He was Yusuf Yohana, who came from a minority, from a Christian background. He's not been celebrated enough. I think more can be done in that way to promote these players. And I think the media gives you so much. If he's celebrated in a proper way, which I think he's not been done, or sort of promoted that way, that could a lot. And say one other thing while commentating, we fall into this trap of, well, novices like myself fall into a trap of stereotyping, or just sort of going through a player's ability. I think the more you research, like you do, Bish, all the time, the more you prep, you're in a much better way to actually describe that individual player. And that is so important, because the world actually wants to know about a particular player and his strengths and all that, and not to sort of do a disservice to him. I think the promotion in that way of all players, especially players like I mentioned, I think that would also go a long way in improving.
What Bazid touched on there, the words that we use to describe the action and players from the commentary box, how significant is that, and how have you seen that over the years?
For me, it's hugely significant. I think when you look at the numbers of people that are tuning in, and more so for the next generation, what do we want our young people to be talking about? What words do we want them to be using? Is it a universal game? Yes. Do we want it to be a sport for all? Yes. And so I think we need to reflect that through the language that we use. And that's across, I'm looking at the men's and the women's game now. I'm not necessarily focusing in on race, but different words that we use to describe, say, for instance, a batswoman. You would just say a batter, and that can be used across the board, because it then becomes normalized. Young kids growing up end up using those words, and it's a responsibility that we have as broadcasters and in the media. It's something I've only really thought about probably in the last couple of years, but it is hugely important.
One of the things that I've discussed privately with colleagues is the way that West Indians, for example, if I take myself, are described historically as powerful, as strong, and as athletic. And that is sort of contrasted against the way some other teams who look different are described. There's almost a sense of stereotyping a certain demographic of people. Raheem Sterling, the soccer player from the UK, talked about it quite recently in his anti-racism drive, that the media are quite critical in the way that players are described. Tom, JP, Daren, how do you guys see that whole molding or phrasing the narrative of describing players?
Yeah, I think my personal view is I think we have a huge responsibility. I'm a little bit, going to repeat a little bit what Isha said in that, the wording has to be very, very carefully articulated, and I think we are in that transitional stage at the moment, because what we do have to understand is that we have learnt from our predecessors. So we've learnt with the way the game, or we listen to the game as young kids and as players, and what we're having to do is unknit all of that and put that together in a way that reflects what society is and should be moving forward. So I think people who have a voice in the game, whether it be through television or radio, have a huge responsibility and should be proud to be able to pioneer a new way forward.
Daren, I'm gonna jump to you on this one. How have you felt West Indian, your teams, which have won World T20s? Often you hear West Indians described as power hitters, as six hitters. Is there enough of that narrative that gives credit to the cerebral side, or do you think your team has been stereotyped?
For us to actually acknowledge it, that this is who we are, because sometimes you hear some things often and often that you become, just you just go with it, and we would often say things in the dressing room. Well, they see us as a powerful side. We are boundary hitting team, stuff like that, and that is all there is to us. The way we look, you will hear it described and Andre Russell, Chris Gale, but that's all there is to it. And listening to Isha and Tom, more or less acknowledging that, what, we have to put out better, description of especially people of color, and from our experience, it is safe to say that we are the most successful T20 team, international team going around, by the way of winning 2 World Cups. But yet still, until we do it, we don't really get the credit, if you understand what I mean. It's always, we have to do it against these people, being described as, even brainless, to a point, but you look around the leagues, every single T20 comp that is starting, you will see a majority of, West Indians coming in to entertain, and that's how sometimes I'm viewed. I see the viewers as entertainers, which is what we do as professionals, but there's more to it, because the same process that an Australian or an Englishman would have to go through, where they practice their skills and harness it, we also go through that, but because we seem to be stronger, or we could hit sixes, there's also a different dimension to us playing the game. Yes, we are talented at it, but that's not all there is to it. And I feel it's time to probably change the way we use the words. It's not only that, but additionally, we could be the most dominant athletes out there because of the way we look. And you guys in the commentary booth describing it, sometimes could also add other things to describe us as well, because it has been instilled even in our psyche that this is all we are, and that's been in the system for a long time. And Bish, you said something earlier about just seeing people or your heroes. I wanted to play cricket because I saw a West Indies team, a Brian Lara, a Cutley Ambrose running in, winning against guys like Steve Waugh, Michael Atherton. And I just remember watching in the stands how people of color, what it meant to them. And this is the history of what I know as a West Indian. When Sir Viv and all these guys refusing to go to South Africa during the apartheid regime, all these things, this is history that everybody should know. You know, if you know the history of where, you know, people of color, that West Indian team, how they were so dominant, and you were part of it, Bish. If you know that history, then you would understand why we do certain things. And it's an opportunity to also drive in the same way I come into the game, where I know if somebody calls my phone and he's asking me, who do you think is going to play tomorrow? I know instantly I cannot communicate about it. I cannot talk about it. I have to speak to somebody. That has been instilled in the game. This is how the governing body has tried to eradicate anti-corruption in the game. I think the same approach should be in place, where you educate a young cricketer coming in. This is the background of how, what you could say, the words you could use. This is what's happening. So best emphasis on anti-racism, the same way you put the emphasis and the education behind anti-doping. I think that's the step that the governing bodies have to take in order to help the cricketers understand the culture, different cultures and religions in the cricketing fraternity. And then from doing that, all those who are playing now begins to understand who they're playing with and who they are in the dressing room. So things like what happened to me in good faith does not really occur because of the education behind it. It always seems that it is the people of color, you know, that we have always had to adapt. You know, I go in a dressing room. Sometimes I'm the only person of color. I'm the only black person there. But I embrace everybody and I adjust, you know, to my surroundings. And it's only me adjusting to everybody. So I find it, why is it so difficult that you only have to adjust to one person? Why is it so difficult to do that?
I want to ask you before I go to JP, was there something simmering? Did cause World T20 wins, particularly the last one? Was there a sort of backs against the walls, feeling a siege mentality, taking on a lot of stuff in that win?
We have always felt like it's been the back against the wall. We always have to prove that we are not what you are describing us as. And that shouldn't be, because England, South Africa, Australia, they don't go through such ridicule, if that's a word I could use. Every time there's a tournament, every time there's a West Indian team going, you hear of all the criticisms, of all the negative stuff, and we have to constantly be overcoming that to prove to the cricket world that we matter. And if, I don't want to talk too much, but it is something that I'm very passionate about. You know, you look at, when I look at Fire in Babylon, Bish, you know, and the racism is also systemic. You know, it's the kneeling of this guy, you know, on this guy's neck brought so many scenarios to me. You know, the symbol itself, I saw it as the people in power just suffocating those who are less fortunate. And looking at Fire in Babylon, looking at when Thompson and Lilly and all these guys were bowling quick and hurting people, broken ribs. And then I watch a black team becoming so dominant, and then you see the bouncer rules start to come in and all these things start to come in, and I take it as, and I understand this is just trying to limit the success a team of color could have. And I might be wrong, but that's just how I see it. and the system shouldn't allow that. You know, you were part of that regime. You probably could speak about it more than me. I'm just talking about the history, and I'm sorry for shouting, but I'm passionate about it. And just this thing happening has triggered a conversation that needs to be had across the cricketing fraternity.
Now, I sense the passion that has come out in everything you've just said there, Daren. Yeah, I have my views on that because the West Indies team had their bouncers limited, and today we're celebrating Neil Wagner, an excellent bowler in his own right, but bowling 4 short deliveries and over. So times really have changed where we're celebrating one guy now, and then 25 years ago we were castigating a few. JP, people don't understand when you use the term transformation. Why is it important? You've explained how and where, but why is it important to have almost fast tracking certain players into the situation because of historical discrepancies or subjugation or oppression? Explain to me why that's important and how.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is opportunity, and so I mean that's the initial thinking behind inclusivity and transformation is giving a certain demographic and opportunity. Now, for me, the thing about opportunity, I don't think we've necessarily ironed out or identified the perfect place for it. And the reason why I'm saying that, I'm kind of muddled between whether it is opportunity at international cricket, domestic cricket, or is it opportunity at your sort of junior level. So what do we mean by opportunity? It is opportunity that, if we think about currently what transformation looks like, is there's certain spots available for a certain demographic, and that's a non-negotiable. So that is a government rule at the moment. If you look at domestic cricket, 3 black Africans must play in a domestic cricket game. You can only have a maximum of 5 white players in a starting 11. Now that's already, and for whatever reason that is put in place, it already puts the team on a back foot, because there's a potential, either way, there's a potential to not be able to pick your best team that you have on in terms of your squad. I'm not saying that has always been the case, but I'm saying that there's a potential for it. But what that does is, it even gives a black African player the sense, and this is based on conversations I've had with black Africans, even players of color like myself. It gives you a sense that at times you are not picked on merit. And that is degrading, a degrading experience for players of color. However, we understand why it came into play, but now we're trying to find this balance of inclusivity, and I don't think we found it yet. Because if I look deeper into the challenge that we have, we've got a big challenge in terms of infrastructure, facilities for the townships, for disadvantaged communities. You don't necessarily have opportunities for great facilities for these players. So what happens to them? They have to go to the mainstream schools to get expert coaching, to get opportunities to play at good facilities. But you get taken out of your sort of natural environment and you get thrown into a different environment. And a lot of it comes back to the fact that they struggle in those environments because, one, they're not used to it, but also they get viewed in a certain way. And I'm not saying that's everybody. It's just a few stories that have come out. They get viewed in a certain way. And the process of that, unfortunately, is that there's a scarring there. So we've got a sort of big opportunity in our hands here. Can we use this transformation process as an internal thing? And I view it in terms of, I saw a video that happened in America, particularly in what's happening around this Black Lives Matter. And I saw this video where this policeman walked up to these protesters, and you guys might have seen it. And instead of becoming aggressive, he literally put out his hand to shake the black African guy's hand and knelt before him. And the entire crowd erupted. And what that said for me is, can we at some point in our society acknowledge what white privilege actually means? And for me, it it is almost just having the benefit of the doubt by others, and that's purely what it is. It is having the benefit of the doubt. So can we get into a space from a South African point of view, from a global point of view, where inclusivity is genuine, it is sincere? For us to be a dominant sport in a global context, we need to be able to acknowledge every single country, how small you are. We certainly play our role in terms of the greater picture of cricket. So can we find that balance in the inclusivity?
Yeah, I think that was well explained. Look, I had experiences that I constantly go through that I'm not sure that people often understand. For example, last year during the World Cup, I traveled on trains quite a lot. And oftentimes when I'm traveling to a very busy place, and I'm going to be real with this, and the crowds are piling onto the train, or I'm leaving a venue on the train and the crowds are piling off, I sat and I watched this with a colleague of mine, that I would be sitting in a seat and people would be coming on and everyone would fill up every seat on that train. And sometimes I would travel to my destination, people would be standing and no one would come and sit near me, or it would be the last seat to be filled. And sometimes it would probably only be filled by some teenager or someone in the early 20s. If I'm walking down the street, I'm often very aware if someone is walking towards me that looks different, that is, let's say, quote unquote, Caucasian or white and female especially, I would probably take the initiative and cross the street. So those are some of the narratives and the sentiments that have been built up. If I go to Isha and I ask Isha as I go along the bottom road, to Isha and Tom and to Bazid, in a broadcasting context, in a coaching context, in an administration context, Michael Carberry had some strong sentiments the other day to say that he wants to see more people get an equal opportunity. He doesn't want tokenism. He wants an equal opportunity of visual in administrative or broadcasting sense. How do we see that?
I think we are seeing that slowly. With the ECB, we have a very thorough South Asian strategy, which came into place 2 or 3 years ago to increase that representation at all levels. So community leaders helping out young kids from a South Asian background, and just helping them along their path into the county setup, more representation in terms of coaches, umpires. It's still not where it probably needs to be, but I think that there are two things that are relevant when it comes to talking about representation in that aspect, and at board level is the fact that not only is it that visibility of representation, as I mentioned before, young kid or even an adult sees that and says, right, there are opportunities for me, people like me, but also it's that knowledge, that understanding of that background, and the understanding of unconscious bias. And as much as people don't want to admit there's unconscious bias, it is prevalent. Wherever you go, it is prevalent because naturally you are going to lean towards people that you understand better, probably. So that has definitely improved. But then I look at this strategy and I think, yes, it's a long-term strategy, but actually, are we looking at all communities? Is it just the South Asian community? So that's where I think perhaps improvements need to be made. And then also it's important not to group everyone together. I mean, the South Asian community is a vast community. I think a lot of people think, well, we're helping out the South Asian community, but they don't actually know what that is. Within the South Asian community, you have Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. You have people within those countries who come from different backgrounds themselves. Within India, there's Punjabis, there's Gujarati, there's Bengalis. Everyone eats different foods, worships a different god. And again, that's where it comes down to, really breaking it down and getting that understanding. And it's that fine balance, isn't it? You mentioned Michael Carberry doesn't want it to be tokenism. It's that fine balance of making sure that you have the right person for the job as well. You don't want someone to just be there purely for the visibility factor. You want someone who's going to be there and actually make a difference and have an influence. And where does that come from? You need to have that pool, that pool of opportunity initially. So I think part of the problem when you look at the black community in the UK is there aren't that many cricketers because the pool of talent from the age of 8 to 18 has really diminished in the UK. And so really you need to be mobilising that talent to really channel them towards cricket, make them see it as a sport that they can play. And then the spin-off of that is more people from that community going on to become an umpire or a coach or being involved at board level. So it's a thorough approach that's required, but it should be something that's in place for all communities.
All right, as we wind down, Tom, as we come towards the back end of this, your thoughts, your final words of advice from yourself and Bazid as we go forth into this era, hoping to bring some peace, because there are really good people out there, people of great empathy, but I think there are still people who don't quite understand each of us as we sit here, as we look different genders, different colors, different cultures.
Yeah, look, I personally feel there's a couple of things, and I think, firstly, just to touch on what Isha was talking about, I think the opportunity, creating the opportunity is really critical in whatever aspect of the game that may be, whether it be coaching, administration. And again, you want the best people, but you've got to create the opportunity for the best people to come forward instead of it not looking like it's an open door for everyone to walk through. So I think that's really important, is creating that real opportunity and encouraging that diversity into your home, so to speak. The way forward, it's simple for me, and that is making it real in education. I said right at the start of the show, I think we're all custodians of this game. We all have a responsibility, whether we are in the commentary box or coaching or whatever leadership role that we carry in the game. I think we are as important as anyone, regardless of race or colour. We're all responsible for getting better and understanding how we can educate the current generation and the next generation. So as we continue to move forward as a cricket family, we are a genuine family that sees nothing but the game and the purity of our game.
Bazid, take this match home for me.
I think at the top of the show, I emphasized on the fact that you need to educate more. I think now is the time that you really need to drive it home. As even Daren said, that you know about corruption, you know about doping, but this is an issue where you have to drive every cricketer, everybody entering the field. And I think from my home's point of view, I think it's very, very important, because the players have almost no idea of what is correct and how it is perceived and how you are wrong. Just to end it all, I think there's a clip of the greatest ever sportsman going around on social media, Muhammad Ali. I think everybody needs to watch that clip, because he explains everything beautifully. Nothing much else has to be said.
I 100% agree with the educational part. Something that I want to add to that is an emphasis on the spirit of the game. So what spirit are pretty much every player, and I don't only mean it on a professional level. I go down to literally your under 10, 11. How are we educating them in terms of the spirit of the game that they're playing it? Because I think, from an ICC level, there's been a big emphasis on spirit of the game. But and the question for me is, have we lost touch with what that means? Cricket was often referred to as the gentleman's game. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be able to chirp somebody or have a few words. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the intentions of the heart. So when you think of education, you think of head, but if I think of spirit, I think of heart. How do we combine the two in finding a resolution in the way forward?
Encourage conversation within respective boards and countries. I know the ECB are taking a look at themselves. This is a real opportunity for all boards to take a look at themselves, the players' organisations as well, and just everyone in cricket to really have a think about how they are trying to make it inclusive. And for me, it's not enough to say that you're anti-racist. I sit on the board of the PCA, and we are staunchly against racism. We encourage inclusivity, but what does it mean to be anti-racist? Are you going about it in your everyday life, in every conversation that you have, in every conversation that you see? Are you actively making sure that it is being stamped out through the words that we use, through the actions on and off the pitch? Are we doing enough individually? And if we can speak to every player, everyone involved in the game around the globe, then I think we're on the right path.
All right, thank you very much, JP. Thank you very much, Daren, Isha, Tom, Bazid, and I just want to remind the world that there's not one person on this screen that you will outwork in their present and past occupation. No one's asking for any free gifts. We all work very diligently and very hard, and what we want to see is equality across the globe and equal chance for everyone. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.